At its peak, Blockbuster Video had over 9,000 stores worldwide, and they employed 84,000 people and generated $6 billion in annual revenue.
Blockbuster Video, wow, what a difference!
And Blockbuster Night was a cultural phenomenon. Families made it a Friday night ritual.
Make it a Blockbuster night.
Make it a Blockbuster night.
Make it a Blockbuster night.
And the brand was so dominant that competing seemed impossible. And then in less than a decade, it was gone. And in this video, I'll walk through the incredible rise and devastating fall of Blockbuster, and more importantly, I'll share 5 critical lessons that every franchise entrepreneur needs to understand before investing a single dollar. And if you're new here, I'm Connor Gross. I'm a franchise owner and a franchise consultant who helps entrepreneurs and investors to find the right franchise for them. For access to my library of franchise breakdowns and free resources, click the link in the description. Let's go back to 1985, when a guy named David Cook was running a computer software business in Dallas, Texas. And Cook wasn't in the entertainment industry at all. He was a tech entrepreneur who had built a successful database management company. And he had a problem because he loved movies, but he was frustrated every time he went to his local video rental store because the selection was terrible, the store was disorganized, and half the time the movie he wanted was already rented out to somebody else. And he thought to himself, I could build a better system than this. And here's where his tech background became crucial, because while traditional mom and pop video stores were tracking rentals with pen and paper, Cook saw an opportunity to use computer systems and data to completely revolutionize the industry. So in 1985, he opened the first Blockbuster Video in Dallas with a radical concept. It was a massive selection of over 8,000 tapes that was compared to just a few hundred at most rental stores. He had a computerized inventory system that could track everything in real time, and he also had a bright and welcoming retail environment that felt more like a bookstore than a video shop. And the name Blockbuster itself was brilliant because it signaled that this was where you came to rent the big Hollywood hits, the movies that everybody was talking about, and the concept exploded. So within a year, Cook had opened several more stores in Dallas, but here's where it really gets interesting, and that was in 1987 when Cook sold the majority of the company to a group that was led by Wayne Huizenga, who was a serial entrepreneur who had previously built Waste Management into a billion-dollar empire. And so Huizenga saw what Cook had built, and he recognized that it had really massive potential. So he shifted into an aggressive expansion mode. And by 1989, Blockbuster had over 1,000 stores. And then by 1994, they had over 3,000 stores worldwide. And the business model was a cash printing machine. Blockbuster would buy VHS tapes for about $20 each, and then they would rent them out hundreds of times at $3 to $5 a pop. Here's the real kicker, because those notorious late fees, they generated nearly $800 million at Blockbuster's peak in pure profit on top of the total rental revenue. And so for franchisees, Blockbuster seemed like a dream investment because you had the brand recognition, you had proven systems, you had customers who came back every weekend for more entertainment. And in the pre-internet era of the 1990s, if you wanted to watch a movie at home, you had one option, and that was basically to drive to Blockbuster. And at its peak in 2004, Blockbuster had over 9,000 stores worldwide, and like I mentioned, they employed over 84,000 people with over $6 billion in annual revenue. But here's one thing about being on top. There's nowhere to go but down. And for Blockbuster, the fall would be swift, brutal, and completely avoidable. So the warning signs actually started appearing as early as 1997, when a guy by the name of Reed Hastings got hit with a $40 late fee for returning Apollo 13 6 weeks late to his local Blockbuster. He was frustrated, he was embarrassed, and he started thinking, what if there were no late fees? What if you could keep movies for as long as you wanted? And that idea, as we now know, would eventually become Netflix. And in 2000, Netflix actually approached Blockbuster with an offer because they wanted to handle Blockbuster's online presence. That was what Netflix was good at, and Blockbuster would promote Netflix in their stores. And Netflix was asking for $50 million for the partnership. Blockbuster's CEO at the time turned them down because he thought that the DVD by mail model was a very niche service that would never threaten Blockbuster's retail dominance. This might be the most expensive decision in franchise history. Here's what's fascinating. Blockbuster tried to respond, and in 2004, they launched Blockbuster Online to compete with Netflix's mail order service. And it was working. They were gaining subscribers, and their retail locations gave them a huge advantage because they had the brand loyalty, the channel of distribution. Eventually, the board and the shareholders got nervous because the online business, as many online businesses do, it was losing money in the short term. And it was actually activist investor Carl Icahn who pushed for the company to focus on profitability over growth. And in 2007, the CEO was pushed out and replaced with Jim Keyes, who famously said that neither Redbox or Netflix are on the radar screens in terms terms of competition. Famous last words. But that was 2007, and that was the year that Netflix launched streaming. And meanwhile, Blockbuster was still generating billions of revenue, but their business model had a fatal flaw, and it was built on late fees and new releases.
It looks like you have a late fee.
No problem. How much is it?
$32,419.
When Netflix eliminated late fees and offered unlimited rentals, and when Redbox started offering $1 rentals at the grocery store, Blockbuster's core value proposition evaporated instantaneously. And the franchisees were hit the hardest because corporate could pivot and they could experiment with new models, but the franchisees were locked into long-term leases, expensive build-outs, the inventory that was rapidly becoming obsolete. They'd invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into a retail concept that customers were abandoning virtually overnight. And by 2010, Blockbuster finally filed for bankruptcy, and this was the company that, again, not that long ago had 9,000 stores, and it was down at that time to a few hundred. Franchisees lost everything. It wasn't just their initial investment, but many of them lost their life savings and their retirement plans. And the last corporate-owned Blockbuster store closed in 2013. And today there is one Blockbuster location left in the world, and it's a franchisee-owned store in Bend, Oregon, that's become a bit of a nostalgic tourist attraction, but really is not an actual video rental place. And the craziest part is that Blockbuster had every advantage. They had the brand, they had the customers, they had the cash flow, they had the retail location, and they even had the right idea with Blockbuster Online. But they were so focused on protecting their existing business model with those late fees and the retail footprint that they couldn't see the tidal wave that was coming for them. And that brings me to the 5 lessons that every potential franchise owner needs to take away from Blockbuster's collapse, starting with lesson number 1. So lesson number 1 that we can pull from the story of Blockbusters is do not confuse brand recognition with long-term security. A lot of people, when they're looking at franchises, they think that what they're paying for in a franchise is brand recognition. And there are 2 things that I want to say about that, because first of all, outside of a handful of super prevalent franchise brands, there really are not a lot out there that really have true national brand recognition. And if you're in the industry, you're going to know a handful of leaders in that industry. But if you're outside of the industry, you're probably not going to know as many brands as you may think. And there may be one category leader in each industry that is going to have pretty national brand recognition, but downstream of that, you're really not going to find a lot of brands that have enough brand recognition that in and of itself is worth paying 8% or whatever of your revenue for. That's the first thing, is don't make decisions about franchising purely based on brand recognition. And the step 2 of that is look at Blockbuster. That was a brand that did have actual, true national brand recognition, and even that didn't save them, right? Like I've said, at their peak, they had over 9,000 stores, over 80,000 employees, and that wasn't enough to save them and overcome from being on the wrong side of an industry shift. So when you're thinking about buying a franchise, you need to understand that what you're paying for often isn't brand recognition to begin with, and even if there is national brand recognition, that in and of itself is not enough to carry the business forward in the long run. You also need to be confident in the leadership. You need to be confident in their long-term decision making. You need to be confident that it's not only in a growing industry, but on the right side of any movement in that industry. And that obviously was not the case for Blockbuster, despite the fact that they did have national brand recognition. Lesson number 2 is in every franchisor, you need to look for one that has a desire to innovate, because a lot of times franchisors may say that they have a desire to innovate, but they don't actually follow through on that because their philosophy is, if this business model works, why would we change it? There's some validity to that. If you're picking the right system, you should be looking for a track record of success. So it would make sense for them to be proud of that system and maybe be skeptical about the need to innovate. But as you saw with Blockbuster, they had obviously done well, right? It was a system that worked for a period of time to the extent that they had 9,000 locations. But ultimately, it was their lack of willingness to innovate that caused their demise, right? Because here's the thing, if you were somebody who was thinking about buying a Blockbuster franchise back in the 90s, their first question probably wouldn't have been, hey, how are you going to handle streaming, right? How are you going to get into online streaming? That was not anywhere near their radar, so they couldn't, we couldn't armchair quarterback this and say that that would have been their criteria. But if we were going to armchair quarterback this, we would say their question during validation or during the interfacing they were doing with the executives should have been, are you prepared to innovate? Where is this industry going, and how are you making data-driven decisions rather than ego-driven decisions when it comes to innovation? And this is especially important for franchise organizations, because if a franchisor is innovative, that should be a huge advantage to whatever waves the market throws at you, whatever shifts may happen in the industry, because within a good franchise system, you're consolidating resources, right? Me bringing my marketing budget, my R&D budget to the table with my small business doesn't really move the needle. But if I'm bringing that to the table alongside hundreds of other locations or thousands of other locations, we're consolidating resources. That could put us collectively as a brand in a better position to evolve and innovate over time. But that's obviously contingent on the franchisor being a good steward of those resources and moving us in the right direction over time. So lesson number 3 3 is that you should invest in franchises that value strategic partnerships. So like I mentioned, one of the most high-profile mistakes from the Blockbuster story, maybe one of the most high-profile business mistakes of all time, was the fact that Blockbuster turned down the partnership opportunity with Netflix. This would have completely revolutionized the business, right? The outcome would have been completely different had they taken advantage of that partnership. And in franchising, I believe franchising at its core is a game of partnerships, because when you look at the strategic partnerships that good franchisors have with referral partners, right? They may have referral partners of other franchise organizations or other businesses that are complementary, and that may be a great lead source to drive revenue for franchisees. When you look at the partnerships that they have with vendors, those can be obviously very helpful partnerships. And then when you look at the partnerships that they have with franchisees, right? A franchisee-franchisor relationship at its core is a partnership. And you look at how they operate within those partnerships and how they select partners, that is very important to long-term success. And so when you're evaluating a franchisor on the topic of partnerships, first of all, you're validating that they want strategic partnerships, and you're evaluating them based on their ability to bring on good partners. If you're looking around at all the other franchisees and they're a bunch of knuckleheads, and you might think, okay, if they don't have the ability, or they're not demonstrating the ability to be selective and to bring on good partners in the form of franchisee, does that really speak to their ability to bring on good strategic partnerships when it comes to, the more macro side of things? If they were in the seat of Blockbuster, would they have handled that differently when Netflix approaches them with a partnership? You have to look at their track record of partnerships downstream of the business and use that to judge them and forecast their ability to bring on higher level partnerships moving forward. Lesson number 4 is that customer loyalty is not guaranteed. The customer always wins and convenience always wins. And this was a lesson that Blockbuster had to learn the hard way, because they had loyal customers for decades, and Blockbuster was a part of family traditions for decades. And yet, as soon as a better, more convenient option came along, customers were ready to abandon them. We can draw 2 things from this, really, because first of all, as a business owner, you can never get too comfortable. And as loyal as you may think that your customers are, you always have to deliver good service, you have to deliver good value in a customer-friendly manner in order to maintain that customer loyalty for the long run, and make sure that you're not on the wrong side of the Blockbuster Netflix story here. The second thing we can draw from this is that it is encouraging, because particularly if you're entering one of these strong industries where you're probably going to have a lot of competition to reflect that, you're probably going to have a lot of competitors that are mom and pop who have a multi-decade head start in front of you, and sometimes this paralyzes people and they say, I don't want to go compete with these folks because they have so much of a head start. Blockbuster had a pretty big head start on Netflix too, right? To the tune of, a decade and a half. Who was the winner in the long run? You tell me. And it just goes to show you how even customer loyalty, it does mean something, but all of us as business owners should certainly strive to develop customer loyalty, but it's not guaranteed, and we have to compete for it. And you can always snatch someone else's customer loyalty from them and bring it over to your side if you do a better job, you have a better business model. So lesson number 5 is that you have to look at the direction of the industry and not just its size. The video entertainment industry did not go away. It's bigger today than it was when Blockbuster was in its prime, so you can't just look at the size of the industry. But what caused the demise of Blockbuster, in addition to all of the strategic blunders that they made, is that the industry shifted away from their business model. They failed to innovate. And so I see this all the time in franchising, where you may look at an industry that's growing, but it's in a certain way that makes a certain franchise not well positioned to capitalize upon that growth. And it may be because the product or service they're offering is in a shrinking part of the industry. It may be because the way that they deliver that service is not aligned with where customer preferences are going and how customers like to receive the service. It may just be because their operating model is inefficient, and because their cost structure is a certain way, they're no longer in a good position to compete in that industry, even if the industry is strong and growing. You have to look at the trajectory within that industry to understand where the industry is going and validate that any franchise you're going to buy is not only in a strong industry, but one that is well positioned to be on the right side of whatever direction that industry is going to go. The Blockbuster story is a cautionary tale, but it's also an instructive one, because these 5 lessons, understanding that brand recognition isn't enough, right? Looking for innovation, valuing strategic partnerships, never taking customer loyalty for granted, and ensuring you're on the right side of industry trends. These are not just abstract concepts, right? These are the difference between building wealth through franchising and losing everything. With all of that said, if you have at least $100,000 of liquid capital to invest and you'd like my help finding a franchise that checks all of these boxes, click the link in the description to book a one-on-one strategy call with me today. And as always, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment letting me know what franchise you would like to hear more about next.